A massive election upset in Texas is setting off alarm bells for Republicans across the country. We're talking about a state legislative special election. Democrat Taylor Ramett easily defeated Republican Lee Wamsgau's 57 to 43%. This was a contest to fill a vacant state Senate seat in a district near Fort Worth. So why is this significant? Well, historically, it is a deeply conservative district, one that President Trump won by more than 17 points in the 2024 presidential election. Ramett is a 33-year-old labor union leader and a veteran. He will now serve out the remainder of the term until early next year. Both he and Wamsgau's are registered to run in the November election.
All right, people. Adam speaking, there's something you should know. Texas politics just delivered a stunning political moment, a high-profile event that collapsed spectacularly while the key figure distanced themselves and dismissed it. The implications are sending shockwaves beyond the state, serving as a warning signal for what November might bring. Let me lay out exactly what happened because the details matter enormously. In the early months of 2026, something occurred in the Fort Worth area that almost nobody saw coming. A Democrat running in a state Senate district that Donald Trump had carried by 17 points just 2 years earlier managed to flip that seat. And not by a narrow margin, not by a handful of votes that could be explained away by low turnout or local anomalies. The Democrat won by more than 14 points. Let me repeat that number because it is genuinely staggering. A district where Trump had won by 17 points in 2024 was won by a Democrat by 14 points in 2026. That represents a swing of 31 points toward Democrats in just 2 years.
Welcome back to The Takeout. Some of the Republican Party, checks notes, Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, are calling it a wake-up call ahead of the midterms. Over the weekend, union leader and aircraft mechanic Taylor Ramett flipped a deep red North Texas State Senate district that President Trump carried by 17 points. He won that race by double digits in the special election. And he joins me now. Taylor Ramett, it's good to have you on the program. Very simply, how did you win and what does it mean?
Well, thank you for having me. How I won was doing the work. That means going and showing up, knocking doors, making phone calls, and really listening. I think that's that. And what it means is it means that we need to focus on the bread and butter issues and how to increase the bottom line and make things better for working class folks.
31 points in Texas, in a district that was supposed to be one of the safest Republican seats in the entire state, in a race that most political observers were not even watching because it was considered completely uncompetitive. That kind of movement does not happen by accident. It does not happen because of weird weather or one bad candidate or some random local controversy. A 31-point swing is a signal, a loud, clear, undeniable signal that something fundamental is shifting underneath the surface. Voters who were comfortable voting Republican 2 years ago are not comfortable anymore. Voters who showed up for Trump in 2024 are showing up differently now. The coalition that carried Republicans to victory in that district just 2 years earlier has fractured. And the fracture is not subtle. This is not a shift that can be explained away with spin or dismissed as a fluke. This is real movement, measurable movement, documented movement. And it happened in Texas, the state that Republicans have long considered their most reliable bastion, the state that political analysts have used as the ultimate example of permanent Republican dominance.
This is a big swing, a 31-point difference between Mr. Trump's performance in 2024 and this race just over a year later. Wamsgau's received an endorsement from President Trump and also some other prominent Texas Republicans. So what are the main reasons voters embraced a Democrat in that district?
Good morning, Joe. I think the biggest thing here is that simply Republicans are not showing up to the polls, that they are not energized. And on the flip side, what you've seen is Democrats are super energized. This is very reminiscent of 2018, the first midterm for President Trump in his first term, where you saw tremendous Democratic enthusiasm, tremendous Democratic activism. Democrats are not having to do anything to get their voters out. A special election tends to have lower turnout anyway, but the Democrats are showing up. This is a district, as you mentioned, 17 points for Donald Trump, and at the same time, flips here by a similar margin to the Democrat. It's certainly a wake-up call.
Now, let me tell you about what happened when those results came in, because this is where the story gets even more revealing. Donald Trump had publicly endorsed the Republican candidate in that race. His political weight was attached to the campaign. His name was part of the narrative. He had made it clear that he was behind this candidate and that a victory would be a reflection of his continued influence. And then the results came in, and it was a disaster. A 31-point swing, a Democratic victory in a district that should have been safe. And when reporters asked Trump what he thought about the outcome, he looked at them and said he was not involved. He called it a local Texas race that had nothing to do with him. He acted as if his endorsement had never happened, as if his name had never been attached to the campaign, as if he had never heard of the district or the candidate or the election.
Mr. President, from Texas, a Democrat won the special election in an area that you had won by 17 points. What is your reaction to that?
I don't know. I didn't hear about it. Somebody ran where?
In Texas, a special election for legislative
The ninth state Senate seat.
I'm not involved in that. That's a local Texas race.
Did you endorse the Republican?
You mean I won by 17
You did.
and this person lost?
And
Things like that happen.
Does it worry you about the
Well, you don't know whether or not it's transferable. You know, I'm not on the ballot, so you don't know whether or not it's transferable. But you know, you put the Democrats in, you'll end up with open borders again. You'll end up with crime all over the place. We have no crime anymore. And, I mean, think of it. The country has the lowest crime it's had in 125 years in recorded history. The year 1900. That's a long time ago. So it's very good. No, I don't know anything about it. I didn't know. I mean, I know there's a race going there. And it's too bad. What can I say? I have nothing to do with it. Yeah.
The man who had been front and center during the campaign vanished from the story the moment the story became embarrassing. He went politically missing. The same thing happened, remember, when the Republican candidate he had backed lost in that district. The same man whose name and political weight had been part of the campaign. The same man who had made it clear he was behind this race suddenly could not remember any of it. The second the result became embarrassing, the second the story turned from a win into a 31-point loss, he was gone. He disappeared from the story the moment the story stopped being something he wanted his name on. And look, this is not a new pattern. We have seen Trump do this before. Wins belong to him completely. Losses become somebody else's local problem that had nothing to do with his agenda. But what makes this moment different, what makes Texas different, is the scale. 31 points in a Trump plus 17 district. That is not a number you can quietly bury. That is a number that analysts are going to be citing for the rest of the year. That is a number that shapes the entire conversation about what is possible in November. But the Texas story does not end there. In fact, it gets even more complicated and ultimately more consequential. Because in the same state, in the same political environment, another race was unfolding that would reveal a completely different, but equally important dimension of what is happening in Republican politics. Ken Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas and one of Trump's most loyal allies in the state, was running in a Republican primary against longtime Senator John Cornyn. And Trump threw his full weight behind Paxton, endorsing him enthusiastically and making it clear that this was the candidate he wanted to represent the Republican Party in the general election. The result of that primary was a stunning demonstration of Trump's continued power within the Republican base. Paxton crushed Cornyn, destroying him in the runoff and making him the first sitting Republican senator from Texas to lose a nomination in the entire history of the state. First one ever. If you just look at that result on its own, it looks like a massive Trump victory. It shows he still controls the Republican Party, still has the power to end political careers with a single endorsement, still calls the shots on who gets the nomination and who gets pushed out. That is real political muscle. There is no question about it. His endorsement moved voters. His backing overrode decades of Cornyn's seniority and establishment support. That is dominance, pure and simple. But here is where the story turns. Here is the part that analysts at the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and outlets across the political spectrum are now saying out loud. This might be the most dangerous thing Trump has done for his own party in a very long time. Because Paxton is not a clean candidate. Paxton is not the kind of person you want carrying your banner in a competitive statewide general election. He was impeached by the Texas House of Representatives, impeached by members of his own party over accusations of bribery, abuse of office, and corruption. He carries federal investigation baggage. He has a hard right profile that plays great in a Republican primary and could be absolutely devastating in a general election, especially in a state where the suburban voters are moving, where the demographics are shifting, and where Democrats just demonstrated they can flip districts that were supposed to be off the table. So, what we actually have in Texas right now is a two-part story, and both parts matter enormously for anyone trying to understand what is coming in November. Part 1. Democrats just proved with real votes and real results that they can compete and win in districts that everyone assumed were untouchable. The Fort Worth result was not a fluke. It was a demonstration of what is possible when the political environment shifts and the opposition is motivated. Part 2. Trump just installed his loyalist in a high-stakes Senate race in a way that could cost Republicans that seat and potentially the balance of power in the Senate come November. That is the fatal blow. Not to Trump personally, not to his health, not to his legal situation. The fatal blow is to the idea that Trump is electorally bulletproof. The fatal blow is to the comfortable, well-worn myth that Texas is permanently, safely, forever red. No matter who Republicans nominate, no matter what the political environment looks like, no matter how the suburbs shift, Texas just cracked that myth wide open. And the full consequences of what happened there are not going to be known until November. But the warning signs are already flashing loudly. Now, let me slow down and really dig into this properly, because I think a lot of people caught the headlines and assumed this was a one-night story. One race, one result, move on. And it is not. Not even close. This is about a pattern that has been quietly building, and Texas just gave us the most visible, most measurable look at it yet. Let's go piece by piece. Let's start with Fort Worth, Tarrant County, a Texas state Senate district that has been Republican territory for as long as most people can remember. A district that Trump carried by 17 points in 2024. And I want to emphasize that number, 17 points. That is not a competitive district. That is not a swing district. That is the kind of margin that makes national Democrats say, do not waste resources there. We have better places to spend money. That is the kind of margin that makes Republican candidates in that district feel completely safe. No reason to worry, no reason to run a serious ground game. This seat is locked. And then Democrat Taylor Rummet ran up and beat Republican Lee Wamcron by more than 14 points. The shift from Trump winning by 17 in 2024 to a Democrat winning by 14 plus in early 2026 was 31 points in one district in 2 years. And I want to be fair here. Special elections are their own thing. Turnout is lower. The issues are sometimes hyper-local. One result does not automatically predict everything that comes after. But 31 points of movement does not come from nowhere. That kind of swing tells a specific story. It tells you that voters who were comfortable voting Republican 2 years ago are not comfortable anymore. It tells you that the energy and enthusiasm on the Democratic side is real and motivated, because voters who show up for a special election, a low-profile off-cycle race that most people are not paying attention to, are not casual voters. They are people who showed up specifically to send a message. And the message from Fort Worth was unmistakable. Now, about Trump's response, and this is where it gets genuinely revealing. He had endorsed the Republican candidate. His support was public. His political weight was part of the race. And then the results came in. 31-point swing. Democratic win. And reporters asked Trump what he thought. And he said he was not involved. Called it a local Texas race. Basically acted like he had never heard of it. Like, his name was not attached to it. Like none of it had anything to do with him. This is wild. This is the political version of someone causing a car accident and then telling the other driver, sorry, I don't know how to drive. Never been in a car before. The endorsement was real. The involvement was real. And the moment it produced a loss, he vanished from the story. He went politically missing. Now let's shift to Paxton, because this is the more complicated part of the Texas story, and honestly, the more consequential one going into November. Ken Paxton has been Attorney General of Texas and one of the most prominent Trump loyalists in state politics. He was impeached by the Texas House of Representatives in 2023. His own party, Republican members, voted to impeach him over allegations including bribery, abuse of office, and improper conduct tied to a campaign donor. The Texas Senate ultimately acquitted him, but the impeachment happened, the investigation happened, the headlines happened. All of that is part of his public record. This is not a candidate you build a general election strategy around in a competitive statewide race. And yet Trump endorsed him enthusiastically. And in May 2026, Paxton beat Senator John Cornyn, a well-established, well-funded, multi-term Republican senator in the primary runoff. Made him the first sitting Republican senator from Texas to lose her nomination in state history. That is a remarkable demonstration of Trump's power within the Republican primary electorate. No question about it. His endorsement moved voters. His backing overrode decades of Cornyn seniority and establishment support. That is real political muscle. But here is what Wall Street Journal analysts, Financial Times correspondents, and political strategists across the spectrum are now saying clearly. Winning the primary is one thing. Winning in November is a completely different challenge, and Paxton's profile creates serious vulnerabilities that a normal Republican nominee would not have. His impeachment record is not an asset in a general election. His hard-right positioning, which excites the Republican base in a primary, could alienate the suburban voters who have been drifting away from Republicans in Texas for years. The voters who produced that 31-point swing in Fort Worth in February, those are exactly the voters Republicans need to hold on to if they want to win statewide in November. And Paxton is not the candidate best suited to hold them. So what happens if Democrats put serious national money into that Texas Senate race? What happens if they run ads about the impeachment, about the scandals, about the hard right record? What happens if the suburban movement that showed up in Fort Worth shows up again, but in a statewide Senate election? The answer, according to people who study these races for a living, is that the seat becomes genuinely competitive. Not a guaranteed Democratic pickup, but competitive in a way that a Republican Senate seat in Texas absolutely should not be. And if it flips, if Texas elects a Democratic senator, the balance of power in the United States Senate could shift. That outcome would trace directly back to Trump's decision to intervene in the primary, blow up the Republican establishment's preferred candidate, and install a loyalist without regard for what happens in the general election. That is the real story underneath the headlines. Texas gave us two results at once: a Democratic shock win in Trump country and a Trump-forced primary result that creates a Republican vulnerability in a critical Senate race. Together, those two things tell us something important. The myth of Trump's total electoral dominance, the idea that he can do anything, endorse anyone, ignore any warning sign, and Republicans will always prevail, that myth is cracking. And it is cracking in Texas, which used to be the last place anyone expected cracks to appear. Let me bring it all together now in a way that makes the full picture clear. Because by the end of this, I want you walking away with a complete understanding of what Texas just told us and what it actually means heading into November. The Fort Worth result is a genuine alarm bell, and Trump's reaction proves he knows it. A 31-point swing in a Trump plus 17 district is not a footnote. It is a data point that serious political analysts are treating as a major signal about what is happening beneath the surface in districts across the country. It tells us that the voters who showed up for Trump in 2024 are not a locked-in, permanent coalition. Some of them are moving. Some of them are motivated to vote differently. And the ones who are motivated enough to show up for a low-profile special election in February in an off-cycle year, those are not casual voters having a bad day. Those are people who came out specifically to register their dissatisfaction. That is an organized, motivated opposition. And if that kind of motivation shows up in competitive districts across the country in November, Republicans have a serious math problem. Meanwhile, Trump's response, "I was not involved in that, just a local race," is its own signal. You do not publicly distance yourself from a race you are publicly attached to unless you are worried about what that result means for you. You do not disappear from a story unless you are concerned the story is going to follow you somewhere you do not want it to go. The disappearing act is not nothing. It is Trump telling you without saying it directly that this one scared him. The Paxton nomination is a trap that looks like a prize. On the surface, Trump forcing out Cornyn and installing Paxton looks like dominance. And within the Republican primary world, it is. It sends every Republican in Washington a clear message about what loyalty to Trump is worth and what crossing him costs. No senator, no governor, no party official can look at what happened to Cornyn and feel completely safe. That is the intended effect. That is Trump enforcing discipline within his party. But the general election is not a Republican primary. The general election is the whole state. And the whole state of Texas is not the same as it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. The suburbs around Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio have been shifting. Educated voters, suburban women, younger voters. These groups have been drifting away from Republicans in Texas at a measurable rate for several election cycles. The February result in Fort Worth was not the first sign of this. It was just the most dramatic one. And now Republicans are going into a competitive Senate general election where the nominee was impeached by his own party, carrying that record into a state where the electorate is already moving in a direction that makes statewide Republican victories harder than they used to be. That is not a winning formula. That is a recipe for a race that turns into a national story with national Democratic money pouring in, with Paxton's record on every television screen in the state, with suburban voters who are already drifting, deciding this is the moment they make a move. If that seat flips, the consequences extend well beyond Texas. Senate control, legislative agenda, everything. And the origin point of that loss will be Trump's primary intervention. The November elections are coming, and what Texas just showed us, this combination of a shocking Democratic win in Trump country and a Republican primary result that creates a major general election vulnerability. This is a preview of the dynamic that could play out in multiple states, multiple districts, multiple races across the country. Democrats are studying the Fort Worth result. Right now, they are asking themselves where else this is possible. Where else are there districts that look safe on paper but have been quietly shifting? Where else can they run a serious campaign in a place Republicans are not defending hard enough and produce a result that looks like a 31-point swing? The answer to that question shapes the entire fall map. And Republicans, at least publicly, are not treating this with the urgency it deserves. Trump brushed off Fort Worth as a local race. Republican leadership largely moved on. But the data does not move on. The data sits there and gets cited in every strategic meeting Democrats have between now and November. And here is the bigger picture thing. Texas has been the ultimate symbol of Republican electoral dominance for a generation. When people argue about the political map, when they debate whether things are really changing, skeptics always land on Texas as their closing argument. Yeah, but Texas is never flipping. Texas is the floor. Texas is the guarantee. And what just happened, a 31-point swing in a Trump plus 17 district and a Senate nominee who gives Democrats a real target, is the beginning of a sustained challenge to that assumption. Not a completed challenge. The state has not flipped. Texas is not blue. But the assumption that it is permanently, automatically, effortlessly safe for Republicans, regardless of what they do, that assumption just took a serious hit. And the people who are most invested in maintaining that assumption are not the ones currently feeling most reassured. Trump is still the dominant force in the Republican primary process. Nobody is seriously challenging that. He can still end careers, install loyalists, bend the party to his will at the nomination stage. That is real, and it is not going away. But the general election operates by different rules. And the evidence coming out of Texas, the February special election result, the Paxton nomination, and its implications suggests that Trump's influence inside the Republican base does not automatically produce general election strength the way it once did. The coalition that wins a primary is not the same coalition that wins a November election. And the gap between those two things is getting wider in states like Texas. That is the fatal blow. That is what the headlines are pointing at, even if they sometimes phrase it more dramatically than the facts strictly require. The blow is not to Trump personally, it is to the myth. The myth of invincibility, the myth of a permanent map, the myth that warning signs can be ignored because the base always delivers. Texas just made all of that much harder to believe. And with November coming fast, the question is not whether these warning signs are real. The question is whether anyone in a position to act on them is paying close enough attention or whether they are too busy calling it a local race and moving on. The next time you see the headline, Trump goes missing in Texas or fatal blow in the Texas election, now you know exactly what it means. Now you know where it comes from, and now you know why it matters far beyond the borders of one state. This is a preview of November, and the story is still being written. The next chapter is going to be even bigger, because the forces that produced that 31-point swing in Fort Worth are not confined to Texas. They are operating in suburbs across the country. They are showing up in special elections everywhere. They are the underlying dynamic of the 2026 election cycle, and they are going to produce results that shock people who have been taking their assumptions for granted. Trump's disappearance after the Fort Worth loss reveals his awareness that the result is politically dangerous, signaling suburban shifts and coalition cracks that could cost Republicans control of the Senate. The Texas outcome is not a fluke, it's a preview of broader national consequences heading into November.